Johnson, owner of purplePTSD.com, VikingsTerritory.com, and apparently the inability to look directly into the camera. I'm just double checking that our settings are correct because it's been a while since Purple Update Live has been on the air, as some of you may have noticed. It's been months, actually. So I wanted to say hello to the followers of the show, namely Tang, who was a big fan of the show back in the day, I guess we could say. But I'm back. I'm better than ever. Planning on doing the show nearly every day. We actually have a sponsor for the first episode and every episode after that, which is Manscaped, who reached out to us because when you see me, obviously, I scream personal hygiene. So I wanted to thank Manscaped for the sponsorship. You can actually go to manscaped.com and use the discount code PURPLEDAILY, all one word. The P and the D are capitalized. There's a joke in there somewhere. Purple Daily, all one word, and you get 20% off any order from Manscaped, which is pretty cool because they got some pretty neat stuff. But I wanted to just hop into my thoughts on the game today. This week we'll delve into some of my thoughts on what we missed from the show in the last couple of months. I have a couple cool updates. I am doing a weekly co-hosting gig on Bob Sansevier's BS show, kind of as his Viking expert or his second Viking expert on Tuesdays, which you can find just by Googling BS show, or if you're in Duluth, Hibbing, Fargo, you can find it on KDAL in Duluth, so on and so forth. I'm also on KDLM radio every Friday, which is in Adam Thielen's hometown and stomping grounds of Detroit Lakes, and I'm going to be redoing the scoop on KLGR radio in Redwood Falls with Seth Tupel starting next week as well. He took some time off, mental health vacation, we'll call it, since times are tough, you know. What can you say? Speaking of times being tough, yikes. For those of you who have either listened to my podcast, Morning Joe's, or my upcoming, or are going to be listening to my upcoming show that I'm doing with Mr. Mike Wobschall, Wobby, who we hired as our new managing editor for the 2020 season on VikingsTerritory.com and purplePTSD.com. I also own a as a side gig, I make fur coats out of cats, so you're going to hear an army of cats and probably meet all of my cats at some point. I'm like the crazy cat lady from The Simpsons, with a few notable differences. It's okay, Marmar. I know things are rough. The Vikings are terrible. But if you follow my stuff, you know that I kind of lean a little bit more towards what I would call realism. Other people would call pessimism, wet blanketism when it comes to the Vikings. Before the Ngakoue trade, I picked the Vikings to go 6-10 this season, which seems to be kind of out of step with the mainstream opinion, whether it's local or national, or if you ask fans. A lot of people were saying this was a retooling for another run at a Super Bowl, another run at the Super Bowl, as if we ever had a significant chance to win the Super Bowl outside of maybe 2017. But, you know, my thoughts on that are Zimmer, I understand why they extended him. He just came off of the largest draft in NFL, 7-round draft history in the NFL, and you want to give him time to at least make something of those players, because you can say a lot of negative things about Zimmer, but one of the positive things that you can't really argue is that he's really good at identifying and developing talent via the draft. Or undrafted free agents. He finds guys that fit into his system, and he develops them at a clip that is a little uncanny when it comes to typical NFL draft success or failure, and I think that Spielman gets a lot of credit for that, despite the fact that Zimmer's doing the identifying and the developing and the execution. And that's also kind of why I've never been the biggest Spielman guy, because if you actually look at the other side of the ball, namely the wide receiver position, the quarterback position, he hasn't had that same success that he's had on defense, and you could argue that most of that success outside of guys like Harrison Smith or Xavier Rhodes up until 2018, 2019, are on Zimmer. And so if they weren't going to fire him before the draft, they obviously want to keep him around. But I also think that if things progress the way that they're looking, he might be on the hot seat at the end of the season. I actually was surprised by, I wrote an article this week that Zimmer was the fourth fourth highest rated coach according to odds makers, for his odds to be fired first this season as the first NFL head coach to be fired. That's nonsense. They just extended him. They're not going to fire him within weeks outside of some sort of gigantic scandal that maybe Ricky Ellison's been hanging on to for years. But at the same time, I think that the Wilfs do, outside of what Mike Florio says about them, making a deal with the devil and knowing that they're never going to win with Zimmer, but at least they make the playoffs and sell lots of tickets and merchandise. I don't think that's a fair assessment. But they expect some level of success. They're not going to stick with Zimmer through multiple sub 500 seasons. They're just not going to. They've spent too much money in every single facet of owning this team, whether it's paying for their share of the stadium, the things they're doing out in Egan, the players. I mean, they've given Zimmer keys to the kingdom and given him every single dollar that he's wanted, every player that he's wanted. And the results thus far aren't very good. I mean, that's why I said another run at the Super Bowl. I just don't see it. He gets outclassed by these new era, like the new era of offensive-minded young head coaches out there. Like he just either out schemes himself or just gets plain beat. And so he's just reminds me a lot of like a Flip Saunders or a Dennis Green, who has a lot of great success in the regular season. Jacques Lemaire even for the Wild. But when it comes to the playoffs, it's just a whole different ballgame. And that usually just centers around the offensive line, and that's a good place to start, I think, when you're looking at today's game. One of the few bright spots, if you could even call it that, from the Packers game was the fact that the offensive line wasn't god-awful. A lot of people were frustrated this offseason by the fact that, you have 15 picks in the draft, and you have a tremendous need at the guard position on both sides of Garrett Bradbury, with Josh Klein being cut for some reason that I'll never understand, not being able to get to the second level, but he does everything else way better than anyone on the roster does, so he's good at getting out there he's not good enough to get out there for screens, but he pass protects better than what we have. He had a tremendous positive impact on the run game. He missed 3 games for concussions last season. Those 3 games, Dalvin Cook averaged 2.5 yards a carry. It was almost a 50% reduction. So I'm a little frustrated that they haven't knocked on his door to see if he could come back to replace Elflein, who was shifted over to his natural position of right guard and at least wasn't as bad as he was last season, which was pretty bad. Tom Compton level bad. There's one of my kitties. And then we get the news that Elflein's going to be out for at least for 3, 4, 5 games. And the really disconcerting thing is, they bring back Brett Jones, but they don't really have anybody on the roster worth talking about because none of those guys beat Elflein out in camp. Aviante Collins gets cut, clears waivers for obvious reasons, gets on the practice squad. Obviously, Drew Samia is going to start today. That's the news. I've always been a little bit perplexed by the Samia thing because he was on the best line in the country at Oklahoma, and he's a big dude. I expected him to develop faster than this. Zimmer came out and said that his fundamentals. He said a bunch of positive stuff about him that if that were true, he would have started before Elflein got hurt anyway. So a lot of that is camp talk, as far as I'm concerned, even though camp is over. So we'll see how he does today, but it's really disconcerting that that's the case. Unless they bring back Klein, which they're not going to do. The other side of it is really one of the main keys to this game, as far as I'm concerned, is the offensive line of the Colts. If you're looking at the PFF data, they're either had the best week last week or the second best week last week, and they're one of the best offensive lines in the league, which sucks because last week they gave up, I think, 6 pressures out of 50 plays on Phillip Rivers, and this week without Danielle Hunter, with Ngakoue still getting acclimated to the team and getting in game shape, and a whole bunch of nothing between on the defensive line. If they can't get pressure on Phillip Rivers, either organically or through blitzes that Zimmer's dialed up, which is he's going to have to do, in my opinion, it's gonna be a long day. Dantzler is out for the Colts game, which isn't the worst thing in the world. It's not as bad as owning cats. Because I think he was targeted 7 times against Green Bay, and there were 7 completions there for a tremendous amount of yards. But there even things are looking even more precarious at the cornerback position. So you have to think, okay, we need pressure on Phillip Rivers. I mean, he's not. He, I think Rivers like models himself after Brett Favre in a way. Like he thinks he's a gunslinger, at least consciously or subconsciously. He makes these errant throws that it reminds me of like what my plans are for later today. Throwing my cat perfect spiral off a bridge. He makes these throws that he doesn't need to make, like unforced errors. There's not again not a tremendous amount of pressure on him last week. He still gave up 2 picks last year against the Vikings. He had 3 picks in a game where I think there were 7 total turnovers. And so if the Vikings can get some modicum of pressure on him today, it'll really help this young secondary out. Otherwise, again with their offensive line. And even having Dantzler out, you have Gladney who's got a meniscus injury. There's just not a lot of depth. It's frustrating. I'll be honest, because you look at this team and you say, okay, well, the offensive line is never invested in, even though for guards, really, outside of maybe 2018, like the good ones are taken in the 4th or 5th round. You don't need a 1st or 2nd round pick for the most part. I mean, again, I would argue in 2018 when they took Hughes, they could have taken like Will Hernandez or something. There were 4 plug and play interior offensive linemen, guards that were taken between Hughes and Brian O'Neill. They could have traded down, done that. Whenever I bemoan the Hughes pick or any pick, the Treadwell pick, people always say, well, what would you have done? As if any answer is incorrect. I was a huge Michael Thomas guy during the Treadwell draft, and that gets me nowhere. Anyway, yeah, it's frustrating just because you feel like, okay, how many 1st round picks have Zimmer and company used on the cornerback position? Before Zimmer was here, you got a 1st round pick in Xavier Rhodes, 1st round pick for Trey Waynes, 1st round pick for Hughes, 1st round pick for Gladney, 2nd round pick for Mackenzie Alexander, 3rd round pick for Dantzler, and there's just no outside of the peak of Xavier Rhodes is all pro before he fell apart. And I get why they do it. I get that it's probably the most important part of his defense. But it just feels like that's what the trade-off is. The offensive line is bad because we just can't help ourselves when it comes to taking the shiny new corner every single draft, seemingly. And then the results are what? Rhodes is gone. Trey Waynes walks, gets a $14.5 million a year contract, even though people here think he's garbage. I think it's kind of funny now that people are, at least week 1, we're saying, God, I miss Rhodes and Waynes. And considering how Rhodes played last season, that's rough. Mackenzie Alexander's gone, so then you have all these guys who really, what are you going to do? I mean, it took Rhodes a couple seasons, it took Waynes a couple seasons. Mackenzie Alexander was hot or cold. I never really put it together. And you have guys now that should not be starting. Mike Hughes, I think, is bordering on. He needs to get it together quickly to not get certain labels that I won't throw out there because I'll get slammed for it. I understand he was injured, but he's been around the team. He's been around the system for a very long time. Same thing with Holton Hill. He's been suspended, but he's been around. That's why he's starting. Even though, I know that Dantzler technically, by all intents and purposes, started last week, got a lot of snaps, outsnapped Holton Hill. Mike Hughes moved to the slot when Dantzler was out there. But the results, again, just, let's assume all of these corners become all pros, just for the sake of argument. It's going to take them a while to get there. And we've seen that. And so, really, the only way that this defense cannot be a gigantic liability, or let's just say the only way this team can win as is, in my view, is if they, when Hunter comes back, if they get a lot of organic pressure on the opposing quarterback, if they dial up a lot of blitzes, that sort of thing, schemes that that mitigate their issues. Maybe flipping to a zone and getting off a man-to-man, since apparently these guys are playing 10 yards off and so concerned with getting beat down the field that they're just giving up yardage after yardage. There was this interesting thread. If you go to Luke Braun NFL on Twitter, Luke, who hosts the Locked On Vikings podcast, he used to actually do a podcast with me and Joe Oberle called Purple Journal Podcast. He was the first guy I ever hired for Purple PTSD, and he was around on the sites for a couple years. Great dude. Kind of breaking down DVOA and how the Vikings had a better DVOA than the Packers, but they still lost. And it kind of, there's a lot of that's a math question or algorithm question, but the main thing was, how did the Vikings have a better DVOA than the Packers? And a lot of that was because of the quote unquote garbage time stuff that the Vikings did in the fourth quarter, or the average yards per play that the Vikings had over the Packers, which they had more yards per play. It's just that the Packers had way more plays. They just were dinking and dunking and then taking their shots where they could, and if not for a couple drops in that game, it would have been maybe a little bit, or that DVOA, the ironic DVOA-ness wouldn't have existed. But we can't survive that way. We just can't. Limiting long plays, but just giving them 6, 7, 8 yards every single passing play. And then the other scary thing is the fact that the defensive line has really no true nose tackle. You guys all know what happened with Michael Pierce. You know what happened with Peanut Butter and Jelly Hall. And so you have Jaleel Johnson, a guy who's never really gotten any playing time or significant playing time on the line, even though I've been a fan of his because I'm a Big Ten, just blinded by the Big Ten-ness of it. The only solution there, I really believe, is to bring in Snacks Harrison. Dustin Baker, who writes for us on Vikings Territory and purplePTSD.com, but also writes for the Viking Age, wrote a great article about the Vikings really needing to bring him in just because he's a big body. He's had a lot of success against the Vikings, and he would really just, plug up that middle. And the Colts obviously lost Marlon Mack last week to an Achilles, but they have they have Taylor, who we're all familiar with as Gophers fans, and who could be a star in this league and can pick up chunk yardage, even though he didn't really do a lot of that last week. He was still relatively efficient, and so they have to stop the run game and turn this into a one-dimensional contest, and then hope that Phillip Rivers does what he always does against the Vikings. He's 1-3. He throws lots of picks. I think he has 3 touchdowns to 7 picks. But from the grand scheme of things, they have to get more creative with blitzes. They have to hopefully bring in some different personnel. Snacks Harrison, try to at least be 500 until Danielle Hunter comes back, and Ngakoue will figure it out, and then be Ngakoue. And then hopefully on the other side of the ball, Kubiak will elevate this offense to the level of being an elite offense. And we're kind of up against the clock here, so I just wanted to do a quick show and remind you guys that I'm alive and that I'll be back and be doing shows nearly every day. I'm aiming. I don't know. If you're watching this now, and especially if you're guys that used to watch the show before, let me know what the best time you guys think the show should be. Our peak traffic time is usually 7 to 8 a.m. for some reason. I don't want to do that, but people are at work, and I want to make sure that we're getting as much live audience participation as possible, that I'm reading the comments, because that's a big part of why I do the show in the first place, is to hang out with you guys, talk to you, kind of create a therapy session, group therapy for the team. But yeah, I just want to, the last thing I'll say is I hope that with the zone that the Colts run, they'll end up using Adam Thielen kind of as a decoy for the deep play, and then they'll unleash Justin Jefferson dinking and dunking style throughout the day. Irv Smith Jr., Dalvin Cook, maybe some Amir Abdullah. Still a big fan of him. Just underneath stuff. Although, otherwise it could end up being a long day. I don't know. We'll see how things go with the line. But you heard all the stuff about Jefferson in camp and how familiar he was with the offense, as it was a similar offense to what he ran at LSU, and that he could line up anywhere on the field. So I hope we see more of that. I know a lot of people respond to my questions or criticisms of Jefferson like it's the first X of Y. He's a rookie. I don't understand why the Vikings spend a first-round pick on these receivers, and then we're just expected to wait 3 years for them to develop when other teams don't do that anymore. You guys have, we've seen it ourselves. The receivers that step in the first season and just, go ham. And you're replacing Stephon Diggs, and you're using a first-round pick. It should be a player who has an impact immediately. And you should use him as such, especially if they're telling the truth that he's, so well versed in this offense. Then there's really no excuse outside of maybe the fact that he ran out of the slot and, ran free in college, or at least his last year in college, and is not acclimating to the physicality of the NFL or physicality in general because he's not used to it, which is what I said at the time, which is what basically everybody said at the time. My frustration with Jefferson is that everybody that I saw either on our show or on other shows were basically saying they reached for him. He was a second-tier receiver. There's a lot of receivers in this draft, historically deep, blah, 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 one-dimensional, and it just felt like a lot like the Treadwell thing. And then that flipped into, I think, local writers wanting to be positive so they don't get slammed, and people throwing the most pro-ready label on him, a la Treadwell. Different players, different skill sets, but it's kind of the same thing. They both had that one dimension, and I just don't get why we settle for that when we're using a first-round pick, especially when you're replacing Diggs and what his role was in this offense. His role in this offense was to be the deep threat, was to draw that coverage, the most touchdowns of over 40 yards, blah, blah, blah. It's just frustrating, because you replace him with a guy who I guess everyone is everyone's fine with after week 1. Let's just run him out of the slot and let's see what we can get, which is what my fear was, because that's where Thielen does most his damage. So if you have him there, you have Osborne there, Irv Smith Jr. runs 30% of his routes out of the draft, so on and so forth. Why use a first round pick on a one-dimensional slot guy? I don't get it. So hopefully they'll use him in other ways today. I'll leave it at that. I'll be back at halftime and after the game, and then I'll be back in perpetuity. So you guys are stuck with me. Do me a huge favor. If you're looking for any sort of, shaving related things for your face or body or junk, go to manscaped.com. Use the discount code purpleDaily. It's one word, purpleDaily. Capital P, capital D, Purple Daily. But I'll see you guys at halftime. Hopefully, then we'll have some good news by then. But I'm really glad to be back, and I want to thank everybody for hanging in there with me. It's been a crazy time. It's been busy, but it's been amazing. I mean, we hired Wabi. What's that about? Pretty Colts and Vikings edition, brought to you by Manscaped. Go to manscaped.com. Use the promo code purpleDaily, all one word, capital P, capital D, purpleDaily. Get 20% off your next order. They reached out to us because of my thick, super masculine facial hair. And the halftime edition, sorry, I just got kicked off because everything in my life is going wrong, and mainly and especially in terms of the Vikings. Purple Update Live is brought to you by Manscaped. Go to manscaped.com. Use the promo code purpleDaily. One word, capital P, capital D, purpleDaily. Get 20% off your next order. And you can look like me. So I guess they'll enjoy 0 orders. I'll be quick because halftime now is like 5 minutes. As I said before the game, I know that this show's been off the air for a while, so those of you that have followed it maybe haven't necessarily been reading the articles that I write every single day and every week, predicting how things are going to go this season. I also understand that nobody wants to, especially in an instance like this where the game is just pear-shaped, watch a guy who just is patting himself on the back, if I was physically capable of doing that, and say, well, I was right about this, and no one gives me credit for that. I mean, no one cares, really. No one even knows who I am. So, I just want to kind of frame this as, I don't know. I wrote an article about, on Monday after the Packers game titled, if you were surprised by the outcome of week 1, you haven't been paying attention, or you've been paying attention through the lens of drinking purple Kool-Aid or whatever. But I guess I'm a little surprised in one instance, and that's in regards to the play calling by Kubiak and the lack of efficiency and production from this offense. I am and I'm not. I guess I mean the main through line on every disappointment since 2016 has been the offensive line. They were one of the few bright spots, if you want to call it that, week 1. Elfline gets hurt. We put in Samia, a guy who has been, third on the depth chart on one of the worst offensive lines in the league, which is strange because he played on the best offensive line in the nation his last season at Oklahoma. And so, you put in a guy who couldn't beat out Pat Elflein in training camp, which is a huge red flag for obvious reasons. And so, I figured, especially with Diggs being gone, the offense would be an issue, but it's more of the play calling, the conservative nature of it, the just blah of it. That having been said, I can't completely point to Kubiak either, because there's just been a ton of drops. I don't know if it's really because there was no preseason, but I mean, you're looking at guys like Kyle Rudolph making drops. I know the color commentator said that Cousins was late on that throw. That was the most perfect throw he could have possibly made. Any quarterback could have made. Rudolph catches 80% of the balls thrown his way. He makes a drop there. Irv Smith Jr., a guy who all offseason everyone is saying is going to be this huge breakout star this season, has a drop. The drop on the last drive of the half the Vikings had for the screen they were trying to set up. Stuff like that, it's just bad football. So it's a combination of things. It's awful. It's the fact that this defense can't stop anybody on the ground because they don't have a true nose tackle. You have Jonathan Taylor having a breakout game because he's a great, he has that potential. He's a great running back. He probably will be a star, probably be the next Melvin Gordon coming out of Wisconsin, even though Melvin Gordon is kind of a shell of his former self at this point. I'm not surprised there. I said that. I said before the game that, it's going to come down to hopefully they can make it one-dimensional and rely on Phillip Rivers and his weird decision-making and unforced errors. And, we got one pick, which was nice, but this team as is cannot win. They just can't. They don't have anybody in the secondary that has any either experience or starting level talent, or not talent, but experience and just production, I guess is the best way to put it. And that's not a surprise. Everyone knew that it takes corners a long time to develop in Zimmer's system, that it's really hard for them to acclimate to his system. They're very integral in the system, unfortunately. And so you look at that, and then you look at the defensive line. Yes, Danielle Hunter's out, but at the same time, it just they got to somehow get some money and bring in Snacks Harrison. It's really all. I don't really want to break down anything outside of that. Even more, I really want them to bring Josh Klein back. I think that would be a gigantic positive for this offensive line and for this offense. But more importantly, they need a true nose tackle. They need somebody like Snacks Harrison who can just clog up the middle. Without it, what are you going to do? You can't stop anyone on the ground. You have corners who are giving 10-yard cushions, so they're just picking up first down after first down after first down. The defense is on the field. They get tired. They don't execute, even though they're not really executing in the first place. And then anytime we get the ball, we're just doing all this, boring crap. And even on plays that are, working, or that could pick up chunk yardage or could start to build momentum, guys aren't executing. So it's a confluation of crap. It's like I'm trying to think of an analogy of a septic tank, like in a dump truck full of used needles, like crashing into each other. It's just bad play calling, bad execution, bad personnel. And so it's not a surprise, I guess. I don't know. And if they don't start giving the ball to Justin Jefferson, I'm gonna freak out. I'm not gonna lie. I'm gonna just be like I said in the pregame show, why draft a guy? Why draft a skill player in the first round? And then I know Zimmer doesn't like Zimmer doesn't like rookies. Zimmer doesn't have anything to do with offensive play calling. He doesn't even know what the game plan is half the time. He doesn't even have his microphone off mute when we have the ball. But don't draft a guy in the first round if he's not good enough to be in part of the game plan when you have a gigantic need at that spot. I don't get it. It'd be like drafting, well, Dalvin Cook let's say we didn't extend Cook. Then we draft with our first pick a running back, and then we don't use him because he's a rookie. Then he's not good enough to be drafted with your first pick. Then you're playing against a zone defense. You need somebody who can dump the ball off and pick up yards. And I just am not seeing that. And I'm sick of the excuses and everyone saying, well, give it time and it takes 3 years. It doesn't take most guys these days that are first-round picks, that are wide receivers, that you don't slowly integrate them when you have a gigantic need. It's just bad. All of it's bad. And so, yeah, thanks for tuning in. We'll see what happens in the second half. But we're going to lose. You buy, use discount, one word, for 20% off next purchase. You can buy a razor and end your life with it. The season is over. It's full time. I don't care what anyone says. I have been biting my tongue all off. People labeled me as reactionary, and it seems like every single thing is true. So I'm because this is my time to shine. When the Vikes, this is when I come in and do my thing. No, I Vikings go 6-10 before the Ngakoue trade, before we knew that there was going to be out. Obviously, before the injuries, guys. Line. The reason for that is pretty simple. No defensive line in the middle. Real tackle. Have a bunch of corners who, at best, will be in 2 or 3 years. And Zimmer's defense on guys doing to overcompensate for them. They do man-to-man for make sure that if one link in that chain is broken, last season with Xavier Rhodes, the whole thing can really fall apart, or it can exploit it. Is in almost every sense of the word. I mean, Jonathan Taylor started rookie. Yes, he was college. That there were points. It's a bad game when the announcers are saying things like, "Well, they're picking up on first down." I mean, let's see if any other match. Like, that's so embarrassing. If you that our pro team is out on the salary cap, extended our head coach, our man. Some of that isn't there. Michael Pierce opted out for obvious. She got back in. PJ Hall is basically a fat piece of shit, and kind of hurt our chances. They need, honestly, this season, 2 things they can pay for it. They need to afford Snacks and Josh Klein. I don't know why they got rid of Klein. I was already bemoaning the rest of the season when they were everybody go. Linville Joseph was gone. Everyone was basically saying, don't free. They were like, why they did, why they would eat all that to save to $4 million. Guy who actually out of the line that we could at least build on. That had the run game wasn't in the games that he missed with the concussion. Need a guy like Snacks Harrison in the middle. Lil Johnson knows tap. There have a defense. You can't have a defense that can't stop the run, but yards in at the cornerback position. The guys who are still learning this point of Zimmer saying last battles are off. They were in the wrong position. They were not even executing the right. I'll coach them up, which is true. So even if defensive line across the board, they probably and they don't have defensive line. So yet again, it was invisible. He wasn't maybe shape. He's new to the system. Jackson's system wasn't get around the quarterback. They were going to get the offensive line in Indianapolis, infuriate people, and say, "Hey, look at what a good offensive line can do. We have those." So yeah, defense. The bigger story that was going to be the case, and the only hope was that somehow they could mitigate the offensive line through Kubiak and Dennis. 2016, all the he had that really high completion percentage, but all the passes scrimmage. We're not. I don't know why people come to Minnesota, they suddenly just become bad. Norv Turner quit season. Kubiak into gold and other instances, the same personnel this time in Baltimore. Seemingly, Kevin Stefanski right now. I know some of those are cousins using the ball to Thielen. We'll have to ask, doesn't trust B. He doesn't trust Irv. Thielen, a throw to off that better dropped by guys that are supposed to be breakout guys this season. BC, and especially Irv Smith. And the biggest sticking point, I was talking to on Twitter, and my Twitter, if people want to hear more of my negative outlook on life. First round replaced party. I thought he was the most pro-ready guy. I know it's so hard. Where you could get at least instead of field to Thielen, you don't use your first round pick who's already apparently knows the system. You only really look at him during guard. There's a reason that's happening, and people are going to say things like, "Well, it's game. You can't judge Jefferson based on two." Just like when I pointed out the fact that people at trade said that Jefferson shining against the BB. That's a little because who are our backups? If our starters are this bad, who are we not beating? And the reason that he's not part of the plan is because he didn't. He ran the line all year last year. There's no. And people are. This is such a great look at those monster yards he put up last season. Usually, when a guy gets college, you at least work into your game plan, especially when you get to the point where you can't throw to BC to Irv Smith Jr. because catch anything. It's just bad, but it's bad. Cousins played bad. Thielen did. Rudolph drop, and it goes back to Zimmer. So, people, I just want to point out. I'm a little surprised that it's the in certain aspects. People will pull the wool and look at how this team is, what failures have been, triple down on those draft, and everybody mocked into the draft. And game recap on Vikes territory, purpleUPDATE.com, and I look time and all coming to fruition. And at halftime, nobody wants a guy and saying, "Oh, I'm me and myself on the back." I'm saying that because I feel like to winning it multiple times over the offseason, and there's no way this team as is this. Maybe these guys will develop next season. I never people were looking at us or on a record that was 8-7-1 and 10-6 with arguably outside of the offensive line. There would have Lynn, we lost Everton, which we lost Waynes, we lost Mackenzie. Xavier Rhodes, who at least met these younger guys, even though he's only he just turned a month ago. All of this goes back, and so we uses 5 on deep. They don't bring anybody to don't have any money, but something out. It's just a hubris. No, I understand why they were extended. They had got to let them develop. Zimmer's done, quote unquote, up the guy he develops and draft. corners. We spent round picks. These guys, third round now, and it's, so what? Now 2 or 3 years to develop to do the exact same thing that we did before. We're gonna pay Kirk Cousins $1 million. It's just bad. And so I'm sure no one's watching this. Nobody wants to watch highlights or hear rants. But Vikes Territory, Purple. Also purpleTerritoryRadio.com. You can see about 30 local Minnesota sports podcasts. Pretty cool. We're having a couple more. This I'll just hopefully they'll turn things around, but I don't see it unless again pick up some veterans. Snacks Harrison or but where's that money gonna come from? Maybe Cousins will realize happen. I don't know. I have no answer. I only have look at me. I'm so everybody laughed at me. Hyperbolic weirdo. I feel like but check out you daily. It's you get 20% off their stuff there. Our podcast, this is amazing. We have a couple of really like to partner with people who hook you guys at times like where, I'm not I would wait till Wednesday to pay attention to the Vikings again after a loss. Handle it. So every click means a lot to us. The first season really per 15 that